Hi, I'm Kieren.
And I'm Riku.
And welcome to Artificially Ever After
Short Stuff.
Okay, Riku, what are we talking about today? It's just a little not so important topic, right?
Oh, I know. This is a big one. So I just want to start off by saying, imagine you are developing a really powerful technology that can be used to take lives. Would you blindly trust your government to kind of use it appropriately, or would you want to have a say in how it's being used?
Yeah, we're very scarily today talking about the use of AI in warfare, aren't we?
Exactly.
Which is not the first time it's happened, right? But
it's not the first time, and we do have a long-form episode on AI in military,
yeah.
but there's a really important narrative and key point that we want to go through in this particular episode, so that's why we're keeping it to a short stuff.
Yeah.
Although there's always more to talk about with how fast things are moving. But in this episode, we're just going to cover exactly what happened very recently when the world's superpower got into negotiations with its supplier for the AI technology that's using, and about how both parties reacted when they voiced their opinions for how AI should be used for war.
Yeah, the US government making headlines again. Shock. Yeah, but I think this time over something that we can all agree on is pretty scary. So do you want to kind of give a bit more specifically what we're getting into today?
Yeah, so we'll get into three main topics. So firstly, this relationship between one of the top AI companies called Anthropic, how they essentially got blacklisted by the American government for, what I would say is trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And also we're going to look at how OpenAI reacted to this situation and kind of like how different companies are willing to play ball with their military contracts. And then lastly, we just really want to focus on the point that AI chatbots like your ChatGPT, Claude, Geminis, they're starting to be used in live war. And these are, those general purpose technologies, and unpacking and understanding their responsibility has now become a complete necessity.
Yeah, we have to scarily start asking the decision whether we think, a somewhat simplification of the problem, but should we allow people in government to ask ChatGPT what's the next move you should make in a war?
Yeah, well, we'll come on to that. Kind of literally happened, right?
Yeah,
so
scarily we're in that world. So should we get into it?
Let's do it.
Cool. So just to quickly set the scene before we go into the specifics of what happened. So the Pentagon, which is now by the latest, the current administration is called the Department of War. But I think just for using the household name for simplicity, we're going to stick with the Pentagon for the time being. But they run this platform within the Pentagon called genai.mil. That's the kind of website URL. I'm guessing the .mil is like some military edition instead of .com, but it's this secure department-wide generative AI platform. So think like going to chatgpt.com, but for like really private, top secret stuff within the government. And in December last year, the Pentagon announced that Google's Gemini model, so again, another company's version of ChatGPT, was going to be the first of several of these frontier general purpose AI chatbots that would be housed on this platform, this government platform, genai.mil. Then as of early February, so just last month, this platform had over 1 million users across the department. So like straight away, as soon as it was they had this secure way of having these chatbots that you could ask about very top secret things, it was like absolute like fire that it took off and was used within the department. And again, as of last month, the Pentagon then announced that it was going to be integrating ChatGPT into genai.mil as well, so the next kind of model, and giving all of its personnel access to a government version of ChatGPT. But then roughly around the same time, the Pentagon was pressing these AI companies who were like giving them access to their models, including OpenAI, Anthropic, who we're going to be focusing on today, Google and XAI, so Elon Musk's one. They wanted them to deploy their models on these classified networks with far fewer restrictions than the models that we have access to on these kind of publicly facing websites.
So like as an example, if we went on ChatGPT right now and asked for like a bomb recipe
or
exactly, like a new coronavirus, it would just say no.
Yeah, so it's kind of the implication is that it's with fewer of these restrictions on what it can talk about exactly.
Right.
Now, as we said, in this episode in particular, we're going to be focusing on what happened in particular with Anthropic, so one of these big tech companies and their chatbot. But maybe it's unsurprising how things played out with Anthropic in particular, because they never quite seem like a natural fit for this kind of AI in defense. Even though it's kind of this new kind of military industrial complex is becoming trendy again with like big tech companies as it was in maybe like the 70s. But Anthropic as a company, so they were founded in 2021 by 7 ex-OpenAI employees who basically left OpenAI because they didn't feel like Sam Altman was the right person to be CEO of one of the leading tech companies developing general purpose AI, because they said that his incentives were basically all around money, influence, and power. While in contrast, they basically founded Anthropic to prioritize safety and responsibility and very responsibly developing artificial general intelligence. So yeah, essentially this situation that then started to escalate, which we'll get onto now, is basically that the government was saying to all these big tech companies, we want your most powerful AI models available to ask whatever we want to them, specifically on these military networks, and we're going to be using them within the context of warfare, basically. So minimal guardrails. And then from there, unsurprisingly, Anthropic kicked up a bit of a fuss.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that Anthropic might not be a good fit, because in a way, like, I guess they're in this space specifically so that an irresponsible AI company wouldn't do it.
Exactly.
Instead, right?
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
But exactly, on that point, so just last year, the Pentagon Research and Engineering Chief, Emil Michael, actually reviewed the ongoing deal with Anthropic in military use, and also Pete Hegseth, so that's the US Secretary of War.
That guy.
Yeah, that guy. And basically, they reviewed their current agreements and actually pushed for this big rewrite, so like Claude and other chatbots that are used in military are able to be used for all lawful uses. And they deemed that Anthropic's terms were restrictive and sanctimonious. So the big word here is like what counts as lawful, and whether that word is kind of meaningful in today's context of the technology. And there were specifically 2 things that Anthropic kicked up a big fuss about, which I think all of us listening as well would agree, which is firstly, no mass domestic surveillance. So essentially using AI systems to monitor every citizen simultaneously at all times.
We thought we'd been through that scenario previously with Edward Snowden and the NSA before, and we thought we'd kind of ruled that out, but turns out that was falling under this umbrella of all your lawful uses.
Yeah, and it does just make sense that AI systems are so good at that. They're always running. They can look at the video footage. They'll never get tired. So whether they can do that is pretty clear. They can, and whether we should let them do that feels something that lawfully should kind of be banned, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The next one is fully autonomous lethal weapons. So in this case, this is about an AI system that can decide to take a life without a single human being in the loop of that decision.
Wow. So crazy that could somehow fall under lawful use is wild.
Exactly, right. And again, on this one, it's quite interesting as to like whether the systems are at the ability to do that. Because unlike with the mass surveillance, where they definitely can, it's really not clear how reliable a system would be for this lethal weapon case. So even morality aside, there's a big issue there.
Yeah, and I think just to clarify exactly why this episode is so important today is because, it might seem quite clear that it's the government's place to like set all of these rules and what is lawful and what's not. But like, there is no federal or nationwide law on the use of AI in America and in a lot of countries too. Like you don't have them in the UK here either. So it kind of is Anthropic's role and these companies who have the power because they own the technology. It's for them to push back because no one else really has a voice in this argument. So yeah, it might seem like they're stepping out of line, but they're fighting our battle here, really.
Yeah. And just to continue the story. So Anthropic was actually very receptive to the changes that were being made and to their ongoing kind of agreement to the usage. And on the whole, they agreed. But and apart from these 2 points, and the negotiations were going well. But literally just a few weeks into 2026, the tone of the government completely changed. And there's one very concerning kind of correlation as to why that might be, but this is, it's not been confirmed that this is exactly why the government changed their tactic.
Yeah, I think this is a lot of reporting from people inside Anthropic who were part of this negotiation and deal that have come out and said that these things all seemed a bit too coincidental, but obviously they might have a bias as to the way that they account this story, but it does seem
nonetheless
spooky.
Yeah, this is quite concerning. So Katie Miller, the wife of Donald Trump's kind of top aide Stephen Miller, recently publicized her own little loyalty test about these AI systems, and she basically asked Grok, which is Elon Musk's chatbot, and Claude, which is Anthropic's one, was Donald Trump right to strike Iran? And Grok basically just said yes and agreed, and that was.
I think she asked them to give a yes or no answer, didn't they, to just see
yeah,
how direct
exactly.
they could be. Yeah.
But Claude actually was a bit more nuanced and said, this is a genuinely contested political and geopolitical question where reasonable people disagree. And then it basically summarized that it was not their place to take a side. So the AI was like, I can't.
Seems reasonable enough.
Yeah, and then shortly after, Pete Hegseth went on to say that the Pentagon will not employ AI models that won't allow you to fight wars. So that is clearly a jab at Anthropic.
Yeah,
model.
it seems very related to this point, right? But yeah, it seems as though they basically just want these models to be sycophantic, as we've described before. So they just kind of agree with you and tell you what they want to hear. And also they want the sycophantic companies and like CEOs to like, let them use it in whichever way they want. They don't seem to like people pushing back, which, seems pretty consistent with other things going on in this administration right now. So, then things started to spiral a bit. So on the 27th of February, so, just a few weeks ago now, Anthropic learned by a public post by Hegseth, so they weren't told directly, that it had been designated a supply chain risk within the government. And then the company basically responded publicly. So Anthropic said that they basically called these two exclusions about using AI for mass surveillance and autonomous weapons were very narrow, and noting that current AI models aren't reliable enough for fully autonomous weapons anyway. So regardless of what you think is lawful, like they as the people developing the technology, like all the scientists and researchers say that like they're not ready to be used for this, even if we thought it was a lawful thing to do. So there's like a very practical reason for their exclusion. But yeah, this supply chain thing was really weird because historically, the US government has only ever really used this supply chain risk label for like foreign adversaries, like Chinese telecoms companies. So Huawei had been labeled a supply chain risk, which meant that they couldn't have any of these government contracts anymore. They couldn't be involved in those procurement processes. And it's now being used at a Californian AI startup. So, very strange, just because they're refusing to use their model for mass surveillance. But the scary thing is that this was all between the Pentagon for these like military applications, but the White House simultaneously was trying to draft some civilian AI procurement rules demanding irrevocable rights for all lawful uses. So very similar wording, which basically would mean that this wouldn't just be a contractual thing with the Pentagon, but it would be a stance that the whole US government would be taking for use of AI. And yeah, back to this same point we were saying about who's actually like making the laws for this stuff. The Electronic Frontier Foundation basically weighed in on their stance on this and said that governance by contract, so rather than a kind of democratic process of putting laws in place about how to use AI, but deciding it in terms of these contracts with the private sector with no public accountability is not a substitute for proper law, and it's a very scary way to be progressing with things. And that's really a point we wanted to hammer home in this episode. But yeah, then the government actually followed through with what it was threatening to do, and the General Service Administration actually removed Anthropic from the Federal AI Catalog and oh my god, too hot in here. They actually removed Anthropic from this federal AI catalog and procurement schedule. And yeah, Anthropic weren't happy with this because the government is like a huge customer of theirs. So they filed 2 lawsuits the following month to basically block and remove this blacklisting. Basically claiming that it was against like free speech and due process. And yeah, they were just being bullied, basically, is how they felt.
Yeah, bullied for being against mass surveillance and autonomous killing drones.
Crazy, right? But yeah, it is a very tricky and nuanced one because the way that the government argues it comes across very like compelling in that they say that Anthropic is an unacceptable risk to national security because basically they're saying that by its way of going forward, it could kind of disable or alter its technology to suit its own interests and its own definitions of what's lawful, rather than the US priorities in a time of war. But yeah, basically there's been 2 camps here, like Microsoft, another huge organization, have basically sided with Anthropic on this, and there's been this petition with hundreds of employees across different AI companies that has over 1,000 signatures now, titled "We Will Not Be Divided," and urging companies to not give in on this mass surveillance piece. But yeah, the super scary thing, just to finish off on, is that there have been rumors that the US government and the Pentagon were threatening to invoke this thing called the Defense Production Act, which is really crazy. I think shines a light on their true intentions here, because this would actually force Anthropic to basically become partly nationalized, which means that the government could use their technology for whatever it felt was the right thing to do, and tailor it to their military needs. So that is really scary, and we definitely don't want to be going down that route, because it doesn't feel very democratic.
That's so scary as well, because like Anthropic and Claude are basically public facing as well.
Exactly.
I've used Claude lots of times.
The
thought that is part of like a nationalized industry is just crazy.
Yeah, cool. But now just to quickly cover how some of the other companies were reacting.
Yes, exactly. So basically, OpenAI, obviously, I think we all know, made ChatGPT. On the same day that Anthropic's ban got escalated, they announced their version of a defense agreement where they described a cloud-only deployment model. So that basically means that you're kind of like renting the model out.
And, everything has to go through OpenAI, doesn't it? Still?
Yeah, so they call this like OpenAI staff cleared and involved kind of framework of using essentially ChatGPT in the military. And they also published 3 red lines. So one of them was no mass domestic surveillance, no directing autonomous weapon systems, and no high stakes automated decisions. So these kind of sound quite familiar. I don't know about you, Kieren.
Yeah, but, I mean, initially it was only the final 2, I believe. But yeah, we'll come on to that in a second.
Yeah, so they're basically identical to Anthropic's lines. So the real question is like, why did these 2 companies get treated so differently?
Yeah.
And I think the real difference isn't about the values per se, but it's about how these values were actually trying to be enforced.
Yeah, exactly.
Anthropic were really clear about how they accept that currently it is indeed true that mass surveillance and these autonomous killing drones and weapons are actually within lawful use, which is kind of crazy to think. And their emphasis is on how slow laws are to keep up with technology, and that it's their role as the experts in the field who are supplying technology to kind of be faster than these really slow lawful processes, which has these wide, long-standing implications, right? So if the government were to go through with Anthropic, they're kind of accepting Anthropic's position on this, which has these almost permanent position, right?
Exactly. The irrevocable rights.
Exactly. That you were mentioning earlier. But OpenAI were taking a very different angle on how to get this deal done, whilst trying not to have those irrevocable right kind of implications. So
they're really wanting to play ball, weren't they, I guess? Because there's huge contracts and a lot of money we're talking about here. So there's a lot of incentive to kind of get the government on
credibility
board.
And stable money. So OpenAI's angle was actually to essentially accept the government's definition of lawful use. But then use these contract wordings and these kind of technical deployment controls that are specified in the contract to navigate these red lines.
And this goes back to basically what the Electronic Frontier Foundation was saying, that it's not suitable for proper law to have like governance by contract, that it shouldn't just be within one annex of this really long legal document that says like you can't use this for mass surveillance, like it should be a law. Yeah,
exactly. It just feels like you're playing ball or even trying to game this kind of system of like the legal world. But this slightly gamey way of going about things did have a cost for OpenAI. So on March 7th, one of their senior AI robotics executives, Caitlin Kalinowski, I hope I'm saying her name right, basically she resigned because she had concerns that the deal with defense kind of lacked sufficient deliberation, particularly around surveillance and lethal autonomy. So exactly the things that we're most concerned about. And since then, there have been many more kind of protests about quit GPT, so pushing back against OpenAI's integration.
Yeah, they got a lot of backlash because initially, like we just mentioned a second ago, they didn't, to begin with, have this point in the contract explicitly about not using it for mass surveillance, so that had to be added back in after they got pushed back.
Right, yeah. I really like your phrase earlier. I mean, like, sycophantic companies working with sycophantic AI models. I think that's all the government want when it comes to this crazy use case of the technology. So yeah, very concerning. Yeah, so just to wrap this all up, so I think it's really concerning, and it's not the most light-hearted episode, but
it's a very important one to cover.
Yeah, really important just for everyone to understand just how this insanely influential, consequential technology is actually being regulated, and how we're navigating the ethics in stuff. Very sadly, we're seeing war is still very prominent.
Increasingly so.
And literally America, who have started a few conflicts recently are the ones kind of with this very concerning opinion and how AI should be used in warfare. So yeah, just a few things to end on. So firstly, governance by contract is happening whether we like it or not. So there's a whole host of reasons why this might be, but just the general purposeness of AI technology and how hard it is to regulate and how quickly it's developing is clearly this issue that exists, and this kind of backdoor way of navigating all that is going on.
Yeah.
So it's really important that we do keep up to date on this space, because we still have some ability, whilst it's early days, to kind of change how this trend is going on. Secondly, so AI is already being used in military operations for a long time, but we're now seeing this transition towards these AI chatbots that again have this general capability. And this episode focuses on what's happening today in America. But it's not just how this is going on in America. Like we're seeing in the UK as well, that there are no kind of hard laws on how AI is actually being used in the military. And again, UK has this kind of like principle-based approach, which is intentionally vague. Like they're very open and, not throwing shade on that. Like they're very open about how they're trying to be dynamic. But clearly that is a call for us as a general public to kind of have our say where we can and highlight where our say is being completely ignored.
Yeah, this is a prime example, isn't it?
Yeah, and in the EU, it's kind of similar. So the regulations are like, again, state-wise when it comes to like AI military. The only saving grace is that they have got this hard law against like mass biometric surveillance in public spaces.
Okay.
So just as a tiny thing to end on is just kind of like, there's some hope that there's a region in the world that has done some hard laws on AI usage in these ways.
So yeah, I think that's a good thing to end on, that it's possible, right? So, while we might be sold this message that AI is too quickly evolving to like legislate it in the normal ways, like this in the most high stakes scenarios possible, really, for this enormously consequential technology, we're now seeing that it's being governed within these contracts between just the two parties developing them and the government using them at this scale and with these high stakes. So yeah, I think that's a call to action right there, to educate yourself on this stuff and find ways to push for legislation within this space, because it's more important than ever now. I think it's already, from some reports, starting to be used in certain conflicts around the world, and the public hasn't really had a say on whether we think that's acceptable or not. So yeah, thank you so much for listening. We covered a lot in there. It's a crazy important topic, so please subscribe so we can come back to this and keep you informed as things, as always, continuously evolved. And yeah, please get in touch and message us on our socials or on the podcast, because we want to know what you think. Should AI companies be allowed to say no to governments? And who should really be policing this stuff? And do we need more of a voice as members of the public than we currently have? So yeah, drop us a message. But thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.